Hello and welcome to In the Light, Growing Your Soul with me, Anna Isabel. And I'm delighted to introduce my guest today, who is Ray Grasse. Hello, Ray.
Hi, how are you?
Very well. Now, we last spoke about one of your books, which is actually about astrology, for the my other channel, which is Life Astrologer or Lightways at Life Astrologer. And you then sent me this intriguing book called In the Company of Gods. And it is also, the subtitle is Public Dialogues with an Unconventional Mystic, Further Teachings of Shelly Trimmer. So I found that very intriguing, and I'm really enjoying reading about Shelly Trimmer and his teachings. So I guess the obvious place to start is, who is Shelly Trimmer?
Shelly Trimmer was born in Pennsylvania in 1917. He died in 1996, and he was he I guess his claim to fame in a superficial sense is that he was a student of Yogananda's, and I don't mean Yogananda was superficial. I just mean that's how most people know of Shelley. He was an occultist and a mystic, somewhat of a recluse. He was married with a family, but he lived with Yogananda in Encinitas at the ashram in Encinitas for around 3 years, as I understand it. But he had already been on a path of studying magic and mysticism and all these things. And after he left Yogananda's it was the early 40s, I imagine. I think he first went to the ashram in Encinitas in 39 or 40, and then he was there till 43 or 44. He was turned down from the military because of physical problems during the war. But he was on a very intense path of self-exploration. He went off back after he left Yogananda's, lived in basically as a recluse by himself, doing occult and meditative practices. Then he got married. He moved from Pennsylvania to Minnesota with his family, way far away near the Canadian border. No phone. He deliberately didn't want to, get attention. And Yogananda basically said, "You stay private. Don't go public like I did." Because Yogananda, according to Shelley, Paramahansa Yogananda got very burned out by the responsibilities of running, basically being a CEO of SRF, Self-Realization Fellowship. So he said to Shelley, who they became quite close when they were together and kept in touch after Shelley left California. They kept in touch, and Yogananda encouraged him not to go public in the way that he did, because he said, "You're not cut out for this." And Yogananda died at only 59. He was very, very young. And everything I've heard leads me to believe that he just more or less burned out. He just was very hard on his system. He was a very sensitive guy. Anyway, so Shelley was a very profound mystic, occultist, astrologer, magician. And when I first met him, it was in September of 1977. And I studied with him. I went down there many times, and we communicated by letter and audio tape. He didn't, like I said, he did not have a phone by choice. He used a ham radio, interestingly, for emergencies and that sort of thing. Uh, but we kept in touch, and I found him to be a remarkable figure in terms of his occult philosophy about life and earth and God and astrology and all these things. And I wanted to put this down in book form. So my first book was An Infinity of Gods, and then the other one was the one you held up there, In the Company of Gods, which is a public format where he came to Chicago back in 1985. And I don't put the ideas out there from the standpoint of, I'm not trying to, convince people of what Shelley said. I'm not trying to convert. I feel his ideas were important to know about in the same way that I might put people in touch with, what Ken Wilber wrote or Dion Fortune wrote or whatever. I think it's important to take in different viewpoints. And Shelley's viewpoints had a certain depth and profundity to me that I feel people should know about, though they can decide when they read them whether they want to ingest them or not. That's up to them. But especially, I was very startled by his theories because I had never heard notions quite like he's taught regarding God, for example, or some of it was very aligned with Gnostic philosophy, the Gnostics, and he didn't ever use the word Gnostics or archons or anything like that, but a lot of it was quite similar, although he had a very more of a benevolent view of deity, shall we say. But each person, to me, I suppose the thing that was most interesting and most unusual was his notion that we weren't created by God, we're independent gods. Self-existent ones is the occult term that he used. Each person is an eternal spirit and a self-existing one. You can't create, if you create something, it's got to die at some point. And we were not created, we were independent beings. And this is something that's at the heart of a lot of mystical philosophies. You find it embedded in Hindu philosophy. There's two primary schools in Hindu philosophy. You've got my brain, let's see if I can recall this, the Vedanta school, which basically says we are all one. And the other school, which is more so I can't think of the term right now, my brain is malfunctioning, but there are independent spirits, there are independent God beings, you might say. And so anyway, that's kind of a rundown, a very brief introduction to, how I saw him and what I learned from him in very broad terms.
Just want to take you back to that image of what we are as these independent beings, rather than it being one. Are you saying then that in his view that we were separate from God, or that we are an extension of God, or what do you mean exactly?
It's a very good question, and it requires a very subtle answer, and I don't know if I'm up for it, but I'll do my best. You're neither separate nor totally independent. In other words, you have this idea. He never used the metaphor of either holography or Indra's net. But in the Eastern system, you have this mythological image of Indra's net, the god Indra, and this net of jewels or gems or pearls, depending on the version you pick, where it's this vast cosmic net in which each of the nodes, each of the pearls or gems within that net reflects every other gem in that entire net. It's very similar to the holographic idea that if you break apart a physical holograph, and the individual pieces, if you take those pieces, it will contain the whole image. It may be in diminished resolution, but each part contains the whole. So are we separate or independent from God? Well, yes, we're both. It's in a sense, you have your own distinct independence, like those jewels within the net of Indra, but you contain the entirety from a particular perspective, shall we say. Um,
Well,
and yeah, go ahead.
I was just going to say, that makes complete sense. Another way of looking at it is we are our parents and we are separate from our parents. We are of them, but we are also individuals. And
Yeah.
that's a very interesting way of looking at it.
Well, it's also part of astrology in a sense, in that each person is a microcosm of the whole. Now, are we separate from the whole or are we part of the whole? I mean, in other words, it's not one or the other, it's both. You contain the entire universe from a particular perspective, but you're not separate from it. So we're not separate from the God deity, so to speak. God is a being that is vastly more evolved than us. But, and this is something I bring up a lot, maybe to the point of, redundancy, but um, Well, this actually ties into an anecdote. When Shelley went out to California, it was, I think, 1939. And when he first came there, before he had started studying with Manly Palmer Hall and Yogananda, because he was kind of gravitating towards, I think Hall's center in particular. And there was an Egyptian teacher that he was trying to find that wasn't in town at the time. So he wound up with Yogananda. Hamid Bey was the Egyptian teacher. Or anyway, when he first arrived there, he would walk every morning for breakfast past this house. And there were all these very short people. I don't know what the politically correct term is now, so I won't even try. I'll just say very short people. I got in trouble last time I told this story because people said, that's, bad word. And I didn't mean it. Anyway, so one of the short people said, hey, we have Shelley was very short himself. He was about 5 feet tall. And one of the people in this house, one of these very short people, came out and says, we've got a woman here that you might like to meet, Shelley says, I'm not interested. Anyway, it turns out those were the short people that were starring in The Wizard of Oz, because they were filming it was 38 or 39. And those were the individuals that were played the Munchkins in The Wizard of Oz. Now, there's a reason I bring this up. There are these uncanny sort of connections to The Wizard of Oz as a mythic statement of our times, and how it ties into the Aquarian Age, how it ties into Shelley's notion of God, etc. And L. Frank Baum, the author, had been a member of the Theosophical Society. He joined in 1892, I believe it was, right during the Pluto-Neptune conjunction. So he was aware of mystical ideas and philosophy. And if you look at The Wizard of Oz, it's this idea where the wizard becomes a symbol for God. And they're going to the all-knowing wizard for the answers. And it turns out he's just a being like they are. Very important mystical clue. Not only that, but he says to Dorothy, the answer's always been within you. There's a deep mysticism there. Now, whether Baum fully understood it, I think he probably did, since he had that theosophical background. But it's very intriguing because it ties into Shelley's ideas quite closely, if you really think about it. And now I got off track there. I forget where you got me started with that question.
Well, we've meandered somewhat, but the idea of the answer being within ourselves, and the reminder that we are not, I guess the implication of that is that we are not insignificant. We may not be the God, but we are not insignificant, and that we are valuable and that we are important. A message that I think needs to be, almost put into neon signs everywhere when everyone is looking to other people for answers, and the savior, which is, I think, a hallmark of our time. And we need to remember that there is wisdom inside of us.
Well, it ties into the idea in most of these esoteric traditions that we are God beings, we are individual gods, and that was certainly Shelley's idea, that we're sleeping gods, and that it's really a matter of, well, the old Greek saying, know thyself, this idea of, there are some answers outside, I suppose. If you want to get your car repaired, you go to the car repairman. You don't meditate necessarily. I suppose some people could do that. But it's really, an internal process. What the wizard said is very profound. The answer is within you. And he said that to all four of those creatures, not just Dorothy. We can get off on a whole rant about the Wizard of Oz and how that came out under the Uranus return of L. Frank Baum, the author, and now this new iteration of the story is under the next Uranus return from L. Frank Baum's horoscope. Uncanny cyclic patterns.
So one of the things that I'm enjoying about his teachings is the encouragement that he gives for people to not just accept things at face value and to question and to play about with ideas. And I like that because I can see he is like that. He's playing about with ideas and isn't just giving you the expected answers to questions. And it made me smile, reading the part about reincarnation, um, where he says there is no universal law that says you have to reincarnate again, which is not what we hear very often. We hear that you have to, that it's just inevitable that it's going to happen. And he says, no, actually, no universal law says that you have to reincarnate again. And that did make me smile.
Well, there's a section in that part of the book where he also said, someone said, it was a question in the first or second chapter about why did I choose this life? I have all this suffering. And he said, well, you don't exactly choose it. It's the unbalanced forces in your being that causes you to gravitate towards certain life conditions, whether they're positive or negative. And so you can choose not to come back if you want, but it's awfully hard if you have unfinished business in terms of, say, you may be attracted to sex, you might be attracted to violence even, you might be attracted to learning certain things. Not that any of those things are inherently bad, but the sheer force of desire is such, or unresolved trauma, for example, that you may feel you have to come back, or you just automatically are drawn back. You hear these stories time and again of little children who still have a memory of that transition process, and they say, "Mommy, I was drawn to your body," or whatever it is. That sense of they're hovering around in the astral, and they kind of are magnetically drawn to certain families, shall we say. And so I don't know how conscious the choice is in 99% of the population. It could be like moths to flame for a lot of people. And that's why they talk in the yogic tradition, certainly about trying to stay as aware as possible so you can make your decisions consciously. You don't just come back out of impulse or out of desire or fear, but out of a conscious, choice.
It is interesting, that that view. We do have other views that talk about it being a conscious choice. A lot of the near-death experience accounts talk about it being a choice, and a lot of doing past life regression work myself, there seems to be this choice. But these are very nuanced interpretations, I guess, and it could be that it's both, that we're looking for a language to understand things, and so it's the impulse of the soul, and that as we explore that impulse, there is a story that emerges as a means of explanation.
Yeah, I don't think it's the same for everybody. I don't mean to suggest that he was saying, and I'm certainly not saying that it's a one size fits all. I think that, in fact, I remember the teacher that I first studied with that turned me on to Shelly Trimmer, Goswami Kriyananda of Chicago, not to be confused with Kriyananda of California and Nevada City. Um, well, let me go back to Shelly. Shelly was saying how when you pass on from this world, you gravitate towards those environments that are comfortable for you. And So let's say if to you the ideal scenario is sitting back in your rocking chair on the porch, just, enjoying yourself, that may be where you wind up eventually. But this is where Kriyananda comes in, where he once says, someone once asked him, what happens when you die? And he had a very interesting and almost funny answer. He said, what happens when you're born? In other words, it's not like there is a single, script that everybody follows, so that when you pass on, it's as unique and individual as every individual in terms of what their personal issues are and their karmas and all that. But having said that, um, I think there's always a choice in some sense, but how do you enhance that? How do you increase your awareness so that, let's say, when it's your time, you have more control over the situation, and that when you come back, you have a. In fact, just this morning, funny enough, I was writing something for Substack about the way the yogis, certainly in the Kriya Yoga tradition, view preparing for death, which none of us want to really think about. But how do you make possible the most harmonious and positive transition experience? And they have various like practical tips along that line. Of course, they talk about meditating and increasingly harmonizing your being and expanding your awareness so that when you cross over, you don't just black out from blinded by the light, so to speak. But they also talk about practical things like learning to fall asleep slowly, because most of us tend to conk out when our head hits pillow. And as you learn to fall asleep slowly, you have more of a chance of enhancing lucid dreaming, so that you are conscious as your energies go over into what they call Ida, which is the left-hand channel, the nadi. So if and cultivating that lucid dreaming is one way. Learning this is a kind of a this may seem off the wall to some people, but Kriyananda actually suggested the importance of learning to astral project, because it's important to know you are not the body. Because most people, the fear of death is because the attachment to the body is such that, oh my God, I'm dying. No, the experience that people have once they leave their body is that, oh, that's not me. And so you lose a lot of the fear of death through learning how to project out of the body. Not that it's about, you know, leaving the earth and its practical responsibilities behind. It's about getting a bigger picture of who you are instead of that limited sense of this sardine can body that you have. And well, the other thing that Kriyananda taught about the Kriya Yoga approach is, of course, trying to leave with a clean slate, so that when it's time to go, you don't have a lot of unresolved baggage, let's say resentments or hurts, trying to work through these things while you're alive as much as possible, forgiving people or letting go of resentments, especially if someone has passed on or letting go of hurts in whatever way is possible, whether that's through seeing a therapist or whether that's through just working on yourself or talking to a loved one, whatever it might be, trying to settle your accounts, so to speak. So those are a few of the things that come to mind.
I like that. And really, it is about having that sense of peace, being at peace within ourselves, making peace with ourselves, making peace with the world around us. And it's interesting because there is a section in the book about forgiveness as well, which I think is an important part of that making peace. Tell us about how he saw forgiveness, or what part he saw forgiveness play.
Well, it's an interesting question, because he saw it both as a very practical thing as well as a very occult thing. On a practical level, he said you have to be at peace with yourself, but you have to be at peace with the people around you. He often said that he doesn't hold any grudges from people he's known in life, and he was treated quite terrible at times. He did not have an easy life. His father was a horrible guy from everything I've heard. And yet he more or less felt, he expressed anyway that he did not carry any of those things with him. He tried to let go of those But on an occult level, he felt that one, it was almost like an aura cleansing thing. The way he described it, it sounded to me almost like you have these barnacles on the hull of your ship, and you carry these with you, and forgiveness is a way of like cleansing your aura and your spine. You carry these energies in your spinal channel and the various chakras. He had this very profound system of relating the horoscope to the spine in terms of the 12 signs of the zodiac relating to the 6 levels of the spine according to traditional rulership. Saturn for the root chakra, Jupiter for the second chakra, Mars for the third chakra, and the corresponding signs of those rulerships, Capricorn, Aquarius at the lowest chakra, etc. And so he talked about the occult techniques you do, the forgiveness, the emotional techniques, but also the Kriya techniques, which involve working with spinal energies, are a way of like cleansing the spine, so to speak. And also the karmas, the forgiveness isn't merely a nice sort of, emotional thing, but it also breaks free of karmas. And, there's a chapter in one of my recent books, I forget which one. The title is called Astrology's Hard Problem or Hard Lesson, one of the two, in which I talk about one of the very challenging things about astrology, but also very profound, is that you'll have a client come in who has had traumatic situations in their life. And whether it's in childhood or, adulthood, whatever. And you invariably will see it in their horoscope, invariably, whether it's some intense, T squared to Saturn, Pluto in the 4th house or whatever it might be. And the thing that astrology says, which is kind of shocking, is the fact that that pattern was there at the moment they were born, before anything happened to them. Now, what does that tell you? Can I ask you for a second? Like how before I interject my opinion, how would you interpret that? What does that tell you?
Well, from my perspective, and also speaking as a past life regressionist, for me, what I see is that there are certain experiences that we are going to have, particularly I think when we don't have a lot of choice, which is typically in our childhood. And that part of my work as not just a past life regressionist, but also a therapist, is to help us to make sense of the why. And the why is really difficult because it's very easy to get trapped in pain, and it's very easy to get trapped in powerlessness and victimhood. But the biggest transformations that I see are when my clients say, okay, not a place I want to visit again, but I am what I am as a result of who I've been and the things that have happened to me. And I'm now going to take that and I'm going to do something positive, beautiful, put whatever word you want in there. And so the more radical transformations say, well, I can be grateful for all of that because it got me to where I am now. And it seems radical because it's hard to imagine gratitude for some of the awful things that happened to us. But I think it is very much about the soul. And in coming back to the chart, I think the chart is an interesting map of the meandering journeys that we have to take, but also the choices available to us, so that it's not just fatalistic. And that comes back to my wonderful clients who are brave enough to challenge themselves to deal with those darker elements of themselves and of their past. They choose a different path, to one in which they are condemned forevermore to experience
Yeah.
uh,
Yeah.
powerlessness and pain. Not
Yeah.
sure I've answered your question, but I think I have. I think I.
Sure, yeah. I'll add one more piece to the puzzle, possibly. Uh, there is a way in which we can look at that horoscopic pattern at birth as karma. Well, this is the person is working out some deep issues, but another way of looking at it that was emphasized to me both by Shelley and Goswami Kriyananda was the idea that sometimes we take on challenges to grow. In other words, does a person that wants to improve their mountaineering skills stay at the same level of, mountain climbing their whole life, or do they say, I'm going to try Everest next time? Now, that's not the fact that they're taking on Everest isn't bad karma. It's that they want to grow. So the person that might, let's say, have a very difficult pattern in their chart, they may be taking that on, whether it's conscious or subliminal in some sense, as a way to develop more muscles in a certain area, or because there's another long range goal. Like you'll see a person, like take, for example, Malala, the Pakistani girl that was shot up by the fundamentalists. Was it in Pakistan? Do you know who I'm talking about? She was
I
born in
do.
97. Now, that was a horrible thing she went through. And yet, look at what she has done since that incident where she's speaking to the UN and she's, doing all sorts of interesting work. Now, who knows? It could have been a combination of karma, but also taking on a certain mission that she decided she wanted to do, and that was a necessary stage in the process. So we don't know. But the point is, getting back to the original article chapter, it's astrology at the very least tells us that our destinies are somehow tied into our soul, however you want to interpret it. That they're not just, the fact that that was there, the traumatic circumstances in the chart before anyone did anything to that person. There's an intimate connection between that person's soul and the environmental conditions that they had. That's a very profound insight that astrology offers. You can interpret that many different ways, but we aren't just thrown into this haphazardly. It's well, maybe the Gnostics might say we were thrown into it, but it's certainly we're connected to it, and we've got to at the very least, make the most of it.
Absolutely. And what you're talking about, the choice being for the point of growth. Nobody arrives in my therapy room because they're having a good time. Everybody arrives there because they need to change and they want to change and they are ready to change because the pain they've been carrying is too much and they just don't want it anymore.
Yeah.
And it takes such courage to face our own personal demons and to work through all of that. But that's where the growth happens. And there's that thing, isn't there? What doesn't kill you makes you stronger. I think that's an interesting proverb to bring in here, because when we in astrology are looking at intense transits, like the classic one, Pluto, or even Neptune can be quite a challenge. when we're looking at those transits, we have a choice. We're either going to allow ourselves to drown or die, or we're going to have to swim and transform, or at least float and transform. So, and I'm just using two because there's heaps of challenges that come our way through transits potentially. So, but it is that choice. What are we going to do about this? Are we going to allow it to overwhelm us? Or are we going to say, okay, what can I do here? How do I deal with this? And whatever the pain might be, if we take that choice, we end up stronger.
You know, there's an anecdote. I might have even related it to you before. I had two clients come to me with very similar horoscopes. They were born like within a week of each other. And they came to me around the same time. The whole thing was very synchronistic. And they had both been through a very heavy transit like a week before. Saturn was either squaring or conjuncting their natal Neptune, which Neptune being the escapist thing. And so they came in after the transit had been exact. And I said to the first person that came in, the first man, I said, what happened about a week ago? And he said, he very sheepishly admitted that he had gotten arrested for drunk driving with Saturn on his Neptune. Now, the next person that came in a few days later with a very similar chart, not exactly the same, but I think the lesson still holds. I said, what happened to you about 10 days later, earlier? And he says, I joined AA. Now, to me, that was a profound example of choice, because in the one instance, the person manifested the Saturn through an external disciplinary force, the policeman and the judge and all this, whereas the other guy more or less manifested the Saturn from the inside out, inner discipline, sort of control, taking control of his escapist tendencies. And to me, that was a real turning point in my understanding of choice in astrology.
What a brilliant way to come to that. I think one of the things I love about being an astrologer is the way in which we're privy to these things. It's that when you understand what you're working with, you just get these glimpses into the inner workings of life, and it's always an awesome experience to get that, and very, very humbling. So
Yeah.
yeah, I'm glad you shared that, because that says it all, I think.
There's examples from history along this line. And again, we're not talking about the exact same charts, but one of the more famous ones was Hitler and Chaplin, born 4 days apart. And they look the same. And the one became a source of great joy and humor, and the other, and after a horrible childhood, Chaplin's childhood was terrible. And the other became a source of great misery in the world. And how much choice was involved, but we can't ever know that for sure. But we do know that they both had some similar patterns. I think it was both Saturn square Mars, Venus, or something like that, and some difficult early situations. But there is choice, and so anyway, that's it. Or you could look to Brian Wilson, who just passed away, born the same week, 4 days, either earlier or later than Paul McCartney, though they both wound up manifesting in a creative way. That's a little different. It's not like, an either or thing. They wound up being having a huge impact on each other in their music. But yeah, and you'll see this with twins very often. I just got into a discussion with someone online, Ann Whitaker, about you'll see twins born within minutes of each other, and they're very different. And the example that I've used is I've had twins. I had a set of twins that were born under a full moon. And I think it was Aries to Libra. And the one twin was very Aries, and the other twin was very Libra. And so they really did divide up the chart between the two of them. You know, they both had the same chart basically, the same rising sign even. You know, but they chose which of those two energies to resonate to. So.
Oh, brilliant. Well, Ray, what a wonderful conversation we have had today, and all because of this wonderful book, In the Company of Gods. And I will be putting a link to it in the description box. Now, if people want to find you, how do they do that?
I have a website. Well, I'm on Facebook, and I have a Substack, but I have two websites: www.raygrasse.com, and the other is my photography site, raygrassephotography.com. So that's my email address is on the website, so that's how they can reach me if they need to.
Wonderful. I've made a note of that. And I'll be putting them in the description box. Thank you very much.
Okay, thanks a lot. I appreciate it.
Thank you. And thank you all for watching. Until next time, goodbye.